Happy October, everybody, and happy Halloween. This is my final video in the month of October, the month of the spooky season. And I guess I've had so much fun talking about these horror movies, these serial killer type movies, from Psycho to the two good Thomas Harris movies, and now it's time to answer the age-old question, what's in the box? Se7en. So Se7en's directed by David Fincher, and it came out in 1995, and this has to be, without a doubt, my favorite serial killer type movie ever. Just based on the pure originality alone. It's such a great premise, executed flawlessly, and it's an entirely original script. It's not based on anything. The two Hannibal Lecter movies I talked about were based on books. Psycho was also based on a book, but Se7en really is an entirely original concept, and I just can't believe it. And for those of you who don't know or need a refresher, the premise of Se7en is that there's a serial killer on the loose. You have these two detectives, Mills and Somerset, and they're trying to hunt him, and the killer's MO is that he's killing people based on 7 deadly sins. He's choosing the victims based on whatever sin, and he is killing them in ways that are thematically appropriate to each sin. Kind of like what the Spectre used to do way back in the day in DC Comics until he got kind of boring, honestly. But the original Spectre, the spirit of vengeance, he would do a lot of things like this back in the old days, and this movie takes full advantage of those opportunities because these images, these killings, they don't leave your brain. They're so thematically appropriate, and the attention to detail is there where every facet of these killings is somehow linked to the sin represented. You just can't help but remember it. It just leaves such an impression. Oh, and by the way, this review is going to be full spoilers. If you haven't seen this movie yet, go watch it first because I'm going to ruin everything. But a great premise can only get you so far. We have to have compelling characters, and this movie has them, starting with our two leads, Detective Mills, played by Brad Pitt, and Detective Somerset, played by Morgan Freeman. Now, Detective Somerset is the person that we meet first. He's the rugged cop. He's literally 7 days till retirement. This is his last week. He's burnt out. He's ready to just go home and live his life in peace, away from all these wackos and sadists and whatever else happens in this city. But then to contrast that, we have Detective Mills, played by Brad Pitt. And Detective Mills is the rookie. He's joining the force. He's actually kind of Somerset's replacement in a way, although they never say it explicitly that he is coming on to replace Somerset, but the details are there, like how he moves into Somerset's office, the timing of everything in general, the fact that they're partnered up. But what's compelling about Mills is that he's not really a rookie. He's not new. He's just new to this city. He's worked homicide for multiple years. He knows the procedures. He's got the experience, but he just doesn't have it in this city. And this movie makes it a big deal to know the city. Know that this is not your normal New York City, Chicago, Detroit, wherever. In fact, the city isn't named in this film, which has led to a lot of fan theories about what this city might be. Honestly, the most compelling one that I've heard is that it's not really a city at all. It is hell itself, or at least a representation of hell, or purgatory, or something. Because there is a lot of talk about Dante's Inferno and the 7 deadly sins and the Divine Comedy. All of that are very important thematic elements in this movie. So I think the fact that they don't name this city, and that you have two guys, one who's old and experienced, the other one who's young and wants to help, and he's optimistic and virtuous, but this beaten down old guy is trying to show him like, no, this is the way it is, and kind of guide him through these 7 days, these 7 deadly sins. I can't help but think back to Dante's Inferno, where you have Dante and Virgil exploring hell and purgatory and eventually heaven. For me, the parallels are there, but let me know what you think in the comments. What is this city? Because again, the movie is intentionally vague about it, and I like that about the movie. It feels dirty, it feels lived in, it's always rainy outside. There's a lot of really cool neo-noir, film noir tropes in this movie, and that's probably another reason why I love this movie so much. It does feel like an old detective movie brought into the 90s, especially with the lighting and the costuming, and Morgan Freeman's performance feels very much like a Humphrey Bogart performance. It just has that dour world weariness that Bogart brought to a lot of his roles. It just feels so right at home in that genre. But that's not really what this movie is. This movie is a horror movie from beginning to end. There are horrific things that you see and are privy to throughout the course of this movie, and the movie does not let you forget that, because the movie opens with a crime scene. And it is very much in the same vein of Silence of the Lambs or Red Dragon, where you just see the bluntness of the bodies and the condition of them and the decay of it. The movie does not pull any punches. In fact, the first corpse that we come across is the big fat man, the gluttony killing. And we see exactly what the killer did to him. Tied him to his chair, sat him in front of his dining room table, and made him eat until he just gave out and died. That's a pretty intense way to open up your movie. But as we know, that's only the beginning of these killings, because there's 7 more sins, 7 more corpses that we have to come across in this movie. And the second one we meet pretty quickly after that first one, and it's a lawyer, and it's the sin greed. So, lawyer, appropriate. And for me, this one seems the most clever, because not just that he picked a lawyer, so that's kind of funny, but the pound of flesh idea, that trope, that saying that people use, is literalized here, because what he did is he trapped him in his office over a weekend and forced him to literally cut a pound of flesh off of his body in order to balance the scales, and if he does that, then he'll live. But the problem is he just bled out because he was cutting himself. So yeah, it's a very creative and original idea, also disgusting and horrifying, and that's basically the entire movie in a nutshell. It's creative and fascinating and so detail-oriented. Also, the fact that he bled himself to death, like how he bleeds his clients because he's a lawyer, and the greed and everything, that is also appropriate. And that's just an example of the layers to these killings. They're not just simple on the nose, oh, fat man, he died because he ate too much. They're not all as obviously on the nose as the gluttony one, because that one, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's a fat guy, he ate himself to death, and, you know, the gluttony, that's about it. But I don't know, there's something about that lawyer one, and a couple that I'll get to later. They just go that extra mile to really capitalize on the sin that they're representing. But before we get to that next killing, there is a pretty charming scene, actually, at the Mills house, and Mills is not living by himself. He actually has a wife, Tracy, played by Gwyneth Paltrow, and she doesn't get a lot of screen time, but, you know, it's Gwyneth Paltrow. There's a certain level of charisma and charm that comes whenever she's playing these types of roles. You do buy them as a couple, and you understand Tracy's dilemma of having a cop for a husband, and it's not the easiest life to live. And a lot of that character development happens at this scene when she invites Somerset over for dinner. This is that time when Mills and Somerset are on the best of terms. That classic older cop and the rookie just button heads, not getting along all that well. But after this dinner, they realize that these two killings are related, and they start to form a little bit of a bond, some rapport. It happens in such a natural way where you do buy it. It's not just like, oh, they had dinner together and now they're best friends. It doesn't happen that abruptly, because they do have their bickering and they have some disagreements later in the movie, and there is still a little bit of that tension. But a lot of that initial rubbing each other the wrong way, getting under each other's skin, is pretty much gone after this scene. And if this scene didn't work, didn't have the awkward sense of humor that it had with the whole vibrating apartment, mixed with some of the subtle character development moments where Tracy asks Somerset about if he was ever married. It's a nice breather from an otherwise very hectic and frantic and disturbing set of circumstances. This is just like a brief pause, let you meet the characters, let them kind of relax for a little bit, and then we meet the next victim, which is Sloth. Now, Sloth is interesting because it's not a corpse that they find exactly. Now, Sloth is interesting because they don't happen upon this corpse like they just happened upon these other corpses, where they just have found a dead body and they look at the scene and obviously it's connected because of the 7 deadly sins. No, they happen upon him in a fantastic twist because they find fingerprints, the first set of fingerprints, really the only set of fingerprints we see in this entire movie, because the killer literally cut his fingertips off so he would leave no prints, which I give him points for dedication, but that is extra disturbed. But they find these fingerprints at the crime scene and they assume that it's the killer, so they run the prints. This criminal on file, he's got a rap sheet a mile long, so you know this is a bad guy. And they buy it hook, line, and sinker. They're like, okay, this is our guy. So they send a SWAT team, plus the 2 detectives, of course, into this dude's house, and they find nothing really until they go into the bedroom and they see this dried out corpse lying on a bed with the word sloth over him. He's clearly been tied to the bed, he couldn't leave. They got all kinds of various bodily fluids in jars, and it's clear that the killer kept him there tied up for about a year, withered him away to the emaciated skeleton that you see before you. And right when you're thinking, okay, I know how this goes, that's the next victim, now we gotta find a clue and maybe we'll find the next victim, the dude comes alive. This is not a dead body, he's still alive, he was just unconscious. I don't know how he was still alive. I mean, the dude looks clearly dead, and the effect on it is incredible. Pretty sure they used an animatronic for the wider shots, and they actually used an actor with prosthetics on his face for the close-up. The combination of those two effects is just incredible. The effect is great. And on top of that, it's a really effective jump scare when you see this one cop leaning in and he's like, "You got what you deserve." And then the mouth opens and he's gasping for air and freaking out. But I know what you're thinking, so he's alive, so that's not technically a killing because he's alive. They get him in an ambulance and they ship him off to the nearest hospital to give him treatment. So for a second you're thinking, okay, so he might be able to come out of this. But no, it was too much of a toll on him. His brain was completely fried, his tongue was gone, so he died in the hospital anyway. So, yep. Another body. It's about the midpoint of the movie, so for a little while we don't get another victim. We actually see the two detectives bend the rule a little bit. They call a friend from the FBI who's actually Lieutenant Flash from Batman Begins, so I guess this guy just gets typecast as sleazy, crooked, or otherwise untrustworthy law enforcement. And they give him a bribe plus a list of books that someone somewhere could have checked out from the library, and if it's this whole combination of books, he lives in the city, there's our killer. And it actually works. They do get a name, John Doe, which can't be his real name, but that is the name and the only name we know him by throughout this entire movie. So they come knocking on his door, except can't really enter his house without a warrant because this whole FBI thing isn't exactly legal. So they have to come up with some other probable cause. Before they can do that, they see John Doe coming home, sees him in the hallway. He runs, starts shooting at our detectives, and we have a really intense chase sequence throughout the apartment complex and the alleyway outside. Let's just say that Mills gets the worst end of it. He's looking pretty rough after that sequence. It did nothing for his confidence. But that doesn't stop him because they do still go into his apartment and they find all of his journals and all of his equipment and everything. And if you're wondering how that's even legal with the whole shady FBI stuff, well, they paid off some homeless woman saying that she heard some weird noises. She called Detective Somerset. They came over and that's how this whole thing got started. Definitely not because they invaded the man's privacy using an FBI database, but it does work because they now have all of his property, all of his resources, all of his money even, including a receipt to Wild Bill's leather shop, and that's where they go next. And this leads us to the lust portion of the movie, and this is probably the most uncomfortable and horrifying part of the entire movie. And it's the one killing where you don't see the body. Thank God for that, because nobody wants to see what happened to this woman. Yes, it's a woman, it's a prostitute, so yeah, lust, it's thematically appropriate. Look, I'm just not going to talk about this one because it's just too gross. For me, this is one where it just feels like straight up horror. It gives me chills down my spine even just thinking about it. This one, truly horrific stuff happened to this woman. And I'm just not going to go into detail. I'm not going to talk about it. If you want to know, go look it up on your own, watch the movie. I do recommend you watch the movie, but this is the one where they were tiptoeing on a line. I don't think they crossed the line because they actually did use some restraint. You don't see the body. You don't actually see the instrument used to kill this woman. You see a picture of it and you see the general shape of it. But I do appreciate in a movie that has been so graphic in its depictions of dead bodies and violence and corpses, this is the one where they're like, yeah, we're gonna hold back. But before you can really recover from all of that, we get our next victim right after. These two happen in rapid succession, and the next is Pride. And the victim for Pride is actually pretty simple. I think it's also got that kind of on-the-nose simplicity that Gluttony had, but I do think it's a little more interesting because it's a model. Obviously very prideful, vain, very conscious about looks and appearance and her face. So John Doe just, cut up her face, really messed her up, gave her all these scars, made her looking ugly, and he glued two things to her hands and just left her alone, which actually seems pretty tame for this guy. But the things that he glued to her hands were a phone to call for help, which, okay, that's actually pretty nice, and the other one, a bottle of pills. And this is why I think it's a little more interesting than the Fat Guy for Gluttony, because it did put the power in the woman's hands, literally. She can call for help and live, but she'll be disfigured, and she'll probably have to find a new career path, or she could just take her own life with a bottle of pills. And unfortunately, she chose the latter. She overdosed on the pills, and well, that's when the detective showed up. And now we're coming right on the third act of this movie. We have two sins left, and they are wrath and envy. And it's here where we finally see who plays John Doe, and it is Kevin Spacey. And knowing what we know about Kevin Spacey now, this casting is eerily appropriate. But all joking aside, Kevin Spacey kills it in this role. obviously. But he does turn himself in, and he'll plead guilty to everything as long as Mills and Somerset go on a little trip with him out into the middle of nowhere where these high tension towers are. And yes, we have come to the what's in the box scene, because like I said, we have 2 more sins left. And it's really when he's talking one-on-one with Mills and he's trying to get into his head, he reveals that he is envious of Mills and the life Mills has. He's a police officer, he's got a pretty steady job, he's got an apartment, he's got a wife, he's gonna have a baby. So backtracking real quick, around halfway there was a scene in a diner between Stacy and Somerset, and Stacy needed some advice. She just needed help because she has all these emotions about it, and Somerset gives some of his advice and doesn't exactly comfort her, but it does make her feel a little bit better to get all this off of her chest. And Mills doesn't know about this, but John Doe drops that bomb because he's just word vomiting everything he can think of to try to get Mills angry enough, wrathful enough to murder John Doe in cold blood, turning him into the very thing that he hates, a killer. Like I said, this is a full spoiler video, so I'm just gonna say it. What's in the box is a severed Gwyneth Paltrow head. And Mills doesn't actually ever see what's in the box, but Somerset does, and he's trying to calm down the situation. He's trying to get John Doe to just shut up and just stop talking because he's just goading him on. I don't know if you call it a happy ending. It's an interesting ending, to say the least. I don't know. The serial killer does die, so he gets shot in the head by Mills. And in doing that, Mills fulfilled exactly what Kevin Spacey, John Doe, wanted him to do and be. And the first time I watched this movie, I didn't really put this together because, again, the movie just reveals things as you watch them. It's a perfect example of keeping the audience on your toes, revealing information, withholding information, and just giving you breadcrumbs as you follow along. But the first time I watched this movie, I didn't really think of Brad Pitt's character as wrathful. But watching this movie again, knowing where the movie ends up, the movie does make a point to show on multiple occasions that Mills loses his temper at the drop of a hat. Whenever there's an injustice or someone just being rude or disrespectful, he'll get up in their face, he'll yell at them. If a photographer is taking pictures that he shouldn't be taking by a crime scene, he will go after that guy, just completely lose his cool. So watching this again, I couldn't believe that I had missed it the first time, that this dude really is kind of unhinged. He's on the borderline of just barely keeping his emotions in check, which just makes even more sense why he was targeted by John Doe. And that's really where the movie ends. John Doe's dead, Tracy's dead, Mills lives, and Somerset actually offers to provide any aid or any assistance to what Mills needs. Anything he needs, he'll provide. And maybe I'm reading too much into this, but it seems like the closing narration from Somerset is that he's not retiring, he's not giving up the fight, he's not putting it away, he's not succumbing to the apathy that just infests the city. I guess that is a happy ending at the end of the day. It's not too happy for Brad Pitt's character, but for the city as a whole, its chances are a lot better because Somerset's just a really good detective. But that is Se7en, one of the most original and well-executed movies I've ever seen. I honestly can't believe that this wasn't based on any previous work. The premise is so simple, you get it right away, the execution is great, the withholding of information, all the detective film noir tropes mixed with the horror movie tropes just come together beautifully in a film that really does transcend the horror movie genre. Like all the movies that I've talked about this month, these films are so much more than just simple horror movies. They're psychological, they're procedural, and you get a sense of the most deranged and disturbed members of the world we live in. And what could be more horrifying than that? And I wasn't sure where to fit this in. This is just a quick little side story, but the first time I was exposed to this movie was in the $5 DVD bin at Walmart. I was in high school, I think, at the time, and I saw it there, and I was like, oh, Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman, that's gotta be a good movie. It looks kind of spooky. It was around October, I think, so I was already in that mood. And I bought it. I couldn't actually buy it. Actually, I had to have my mom to buy it for me because it's rated R, and I was underage. So that was kind of funny, but I really just took a chance on this movie. I had no idea what it was about. I didn't know how great or well-respected it was. I just saw the cover, took a chance on it, and from the first time I watched this movie, I just fell in love with it. I love the writing, I love the characters, I love the just overall execution is so good. But now I turn it over to you guys. What do you think about Se7en? Have you seen it recently? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content. And hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. As always, I'm Colby. This is my nerdy talk. I'll see you in the next video.